All right, chapter 2 of Call It Courage. This chapter is called The Sea. Got my book here. I've got my blue annotation sheet. I'm going to start off by just rereading what we wrote for our summary last time so we can remember what occurred. Mafatu is afraid of the sea because he was caught in a hurricane off the coast of Hikueru with his mother when he was 3 years old. His mother died, and his father is now ashamed of Mafatu's fear. So when Mafatu hears the other boys mocking him, he decides to leave with his dog and try to prove himself. And just to review our characters that we wrote down, we have Mafatu, who is an afraid boy of 15 years old. We've got Tavana Nui, Mafatu's father and chief of the island of Hikueru, where they live. We've got Kana, who is Mafatu's friend, until we find out that Kana is speaking negatively of him to the other boys. He's mocking him, mocking Mafatu along with the others. Then we have Moana, the god of the sea. Mafatu feels like Moana is after him. Ever since Moana killed his mother in the hurricane and their boat was shipwrecked, Mafatu is worried that the god of the sea wants to kill him as well. Uri is Mafatu's dog, and then Mafatu also has an albatross, which is a type of bird named Kiwi. All right, so on today's chapter, what we're going to focus on is in our notes section, and we want to focus on making inferences this time. When we come across a word or an idea that we don't quite understand, we're going to look for context clues and try to figure out the meaning, and we're going to record those right here in our notes section. And then, of course, when we're done reading today, we are going to write a summary of what we have read. All right, let's jump right into the story. Follow right along with me. Here we go. Day broke over a gray and dismal world. The canoe lifted and fell idly on the glassy swells. Mafatu looked back over his shoulder, searching the horizon for a last glimpse of Hikueru. But the atoll had vanished as if to hide itself forever from his concern. Okay, we may not understand the meaning of this word, atoll. So we're going to look for context clues. It first says that he's looking for a glimpse of Hikueru, and then he says, but the atoll had vanished. So that says to me that he's probably renaming Hikueru. He's calling it an atoll. So since we know Hikueru is an island, we can make an inference that atoll means island. And we would be right about that. An atoll is an island, or it's a series of islands. So on our blue note paper here, we're going to go ahead and make another bullet in our third row down. And we're going to write that an atoll is an island. All right, atoll, then I've got a colon here, and then island. All right, let's continue reading. But the atoll had vanished as if to hide itself forever from his concern. The matting sails slatted uselessly. But there seemed to be no need of a sail. The little canoe was riding one of the mysterious ocean currents that flow in their courses through the length and breadth of the Pacific, the Ara Moana, paths of the sea, as the ancients called them. Okay, here's another one. We may not be familiar with this word, but this is actually, this Ara Moana in this sentence is a definition context clue. It actually tells us that the Ara Moana is a path of the sea, and if we look earlier than that, it refers to it as an ocean current. And the Polynesians used that ocean current to carry, to ship things from place to place. Okay, now we used context clues there. We're going to write down some of our inferences. We're not going to write all of them down, and we're going to skip writing this one down. Let's keep on reading. They were, oops, making sure I don't skip a page here. They were the ocean currents that had carried the Polynesian navigators from island to island in the childhood of the world. So it gives us a definition context clue there again. Mafatu was drifting farther and farther away from his homeland. With wide flapping wings, Kiwi rose from the bow of the canoe. In ascending spirals, the bird climbed higher and higher, until at last he was no more than a gray speck against the lighter gray of the sky. Mafatu watched his albatross disappear and felt a desolation flood his heart. Okay, we may not know the meaning of the word desolation. We can make an inference, though, when we look at the clue that Mafatu is feeling this in his heart after watching his dear albatross fly away. And we can infer that this desolation probably means like an emptiness. An emptiness is flooding his heart. And we would be correct. Desolation means for something to be empty. Now, there was only Uri to keep him company in this hostile world of sky and sea. Uri. The yellow dog lay curled up in the shadow of the bow, opening one eye from time to time to look at his master. Wherever Mafatu went, Uri, too, would go. All around, as far as the eye could reach, were wastes of leaden water. The canoe was the moving center of a limitless circle of sea. The boy shuddered. His fingers gripped the paddle convulsively. He thought of Kana and the other boys. What would they say when they learned that he had disappeared? And to Vananui, would there be sorrow in his father's heart? Would he believe that Moana, the sea god, had claimed his son at last? It was an ominous, oppressive world at this season of storm. Half a mile distant, a whale heaved its varnished hulk to the surface to throw a jet of vapory mist high into the air. Then it submerged, leaving scarcely a ripple to mark its passage. A shoal of flying fishes broke water, skimming away in a silver shimmer of flight. A dolphin sped after them, smooth rolling in pursuit, so close that the boy could hear the sound of its breathing. This world of the sea was ruled by nature's harsh law of survival. Mafatu knew the sea with an intimacy given to few. He had seen fleets of giant mantas. Okay, so if we don't know the meaning of mantas, they're referring to manta rays. Some types of rays are stingrays. You might be familiar with a manta as being those types of fish that have almost wing like spans that they swim with under the water. So he had seen fleets of giant mantas whipping the lagoon of Hikueru to a boiling fury. He had seen the mighty cachalot set upon by killer whales and torn to ribbons almost in the blink of an eye. Okay, we may not know the meaning of this word cachalot. So if we don't know the meaning of that word, we want to look for context clues. So it says that he's seen the cachalot set upon by killer whales and torn to ribbons. So these killer whales, there's multiple of them, have attacked this mighty cachalot. So that makes me think that a cachalot is, if I'm using these clues to make an inference, if it's mighty, that tells me that it must be probably larger than these killer whales. And the only other thing larger than a killer whale is a whale. And we would be correct in that a cachalot is a sperm whale. So let's actually go ahead and copy this one down onto our paper. So I'm on my third row right here. And I'm going to go ahead and make another bullet and write cachalot. And we know that this is a whale. Okay, let's keep going. He had seen the mighty cachalot set upon by killer whales and torn to ribbons almost in the blink of an eye. Once he had seen an octopus as large as the trunk of a tamanu, with tentacles 30 feet long, rise from the mile-deep water beyond the barrier reef. Hi, the sea. Okay, we've got another word that we may not know the meaning of, but we've got a context clue right nearby. It's saying the trunk of a tamanu or tamanu. I'm going to guess tamanu. And we could make an inference that since it has a trunk, it is probably a tree. So let's go ahead and write this one down on our blue paper. Let's make a third bullet today and write down tamanu is a tree. Tamanu, and then I've got a colon right here, tree. Excellent. Okay. Mafatu opened one of the green drinking nuts and tilted back his head to let the cool liquid trickle down his parched throat. More refreshing than spring water, cool on the hottest days, and as sustaining as food. The boy scooped out the gelatinous meat for Uri, and the dog ate it gratefully. The ocean current which held the canoe in its grip seemed to have quickened. There was a wind rising, too, in little puffs and gusts. Now the canoe heeled over under the sudden attack, while Mafatu scrambled onto the outrigger to lend his weight for ballast. Okay, if you recall, we were inferring the definition of outrigger last time. We never wrote this one down, so let's write it down now. We made an inference that an outrigger was either a type of boat or the part of a boat. And that is true. An outrigger is like a beam or framework that projects to the side of a boat. Sometimes it can be used to stabilize another whole, like a secondary boat that's attached to the first one. Or an outrigger can mean a boat that has an outrigger, that has one of these types of framework. So we were right. So we're just going to go ahead and put that we'll put that it's a boat or frame attached to boat. That term can be used to mean either one. It can either mean a boat that has an outrigger attached to it, or it can mean the actual attachment to the boat. Okay, so I wrote right here, outrigger, colon, and then I wrote boat or frame attached to boat. Okay, great. Let's put this blue paper aside and keep on going. Then the wind dropped as suddenly as it appeared, while the canoe righted itself, and the boy breathed freely once again. He searched the skies for Kiwi. His albatross might have been one of 1,000 seabirds flying against the roof of the sky, or he might have vanished utterly, leaving his friends here in solitary space. The bird had let Mafatu out through the reef passage at Hikueru into the open ocean, and now, it seemed, had deserted him. A storm was making, moving in and out of those mysterious belts which lie north and south of the equator, the home of hurricanes. The wind shifted a point, bringing with it a heavy squall. Okay, we may or may not know the meaning of the word squall. Let's make an inference here. The wind is shifting, and it's bringing a heavy squall. Okay, and then earlier to that, it was talking about how this area can be the home of hurricanes. So let's make an inference here. We're gonna infer that a squall is probably a storm. Mafatu lowered the sail on the run and gripped the steering paddle with his hands that showed white at the knuckles. All around him now was a world of tumbling water, gray in the hollows, greenish on the slopes. The wind tore off the combing crests and flung the spray at the sky. Like advance scouts of an oncoming army, wind gusts moved down upon the canoe, struck at it savagely. So busy was Mafatu with the paddle that there was no time for thought. He called a prayer to Maui, god of the fishermen. Maui, matai tu. Somehow the sound of his own voice reassured him. Uri lifted his head, cocked his ears, thumped his tail for a second. The canoe rose to the swells as lightly as a gull and coasted like a sled down the frothing slopes. What skill had wrought this small canoe? Okay, so we've got this word here that you may or may not know the meaning of. What skill had wrought this small canoe? We can make an inference here where we're talking about skill in relationship to a canoe, and we can infer that this probably means created. What skill had created this small canoe? And that's one way of testing out an inference. When I use the word that I'm as a synonym that I am inferring that it might mean in its place and it makes sense, that helps me to know that I'm probably correct. What skill had created this small canoe? So notice how that makes sense. So we can infer that wrought probably means created. This dugout, hewn from the mighty tamanu tree. Ooh, wow. Okay, we had tamanu on our sheet here for our inferences that we listed. We had inferred that it's a tree, and then here it is, definitely telling us that our inference was correct. It swooped and yielded, bucked and scudded, one with the fierce element whose back it rode. Okay, before we go any further, we've got a new character here that was introduced, and we probably, even though we're focusing on inferences, I feel like we should write this down. So let's pull out that blue paper, and let's back it up. Remember, we probably have some space right here on this second row where we had been writing characters. Let's go ahead and write down Maui. And it says right here that Maui is the god of the fishermen. So we're going to write god of fishermen. Okay, and I'm trying to squeeze that in there. Once again, writing nice and neat and small. Maui, god of fishermen. All right, let's set that aside here and let's keep on going. The sky darkened. A burst of lightning lit up the sea with supernatural brilliance. An instantaneous crack of thunder shattered the world. Lightning again, striking at the hissing water. Mafatu watched it with fascinated eyes. Okay, we've got this beautiful print right here. And you can see Mafatu's tiny boat here. You can see the sail, and if we look close, we can see the outrigger that we were talking about. You can see those supports there. And then you can see that these waves are just swelling around him. So he is caught in a terrible storm, or as we learned, a squall. Okay, we're going to go ahead to the next page here. Now it was all about him. It ran to the end of the boom in globes of fire that exploded and vanished, and in the awful moment of its being it revealed mountain shapes of dark water, heaving, shouldering. How long could this frail craft of wood and senate resist? Under the combined attack of wind and sea, it seemed that something must inevitably give way. The wind shrilled a fiercer note. Spray stung the boy's flesh, blinded his eyes, chilled his marrow. So we're talking about the marrow in his bones. He is scared. The sail went first with a split and a roar. Fragments swept off on the back of the wind. The cords that held the mast hummed like plucked wires. Then, with a rending groan, the mast cracked. Before Mafatu could leap to cut it clear, it snapped off and disappeared in a churn of black water. The boy clung to the paddle, fighting to keep his canoe from turning broadside. Water swept aboard and out again. Only the buoyancy of Tamanu kept the craft afloat. So obviously his boat is made of Tamanu, the trunk or the wood of a Tamanu tree. Uri cowered in the bow, half submerged, his howls drowned by the roar of the elements. Mafatu gripped his paddle for very life, an unreasoning terror powering his arms. This sea that he had always feared was rising to claim him, just as it had claimed his mother. How rightly he had feared it! Moana, the sea god, had been biding his time. Someday, Mafatu, I will claim you. The boy lost all sense of time's passage. Every nerve became dulled by tumult. The wind howled above his head, and still Mafatu clung to the lashed steering paddle. Clung fast long after strength had vanished, and only the will to live locked his strong fingers about the shaft. Even death would not loose the grip of those fingers. He held his little craft true to the wind. There was a wave lifting before the canoe. Many the boy had seen, but this was a giant, a monster livid and hungry. Higher, higher it rose, until it seemed that it must scrape at the low-hanging clouds. Its crest heaved over with a vast sigh. The boy saw it coming. He tried to cry out. No sound issued from his throat. Suddenly, the wave was upon him. Down it crashed. Chaos! Mafatu felt the paddle torn from his hands, thunder in his ears, water strangling him, terror in his soul. The canoe slewed round into the trough. The boy flung himself forward, wound his arms about the mid-thwart. It was the end of a world. The wave passed. Stunned, gasping, Mafatu raised his head and looked about. For a second he could not believe that he still breathed and had being. He saw Uri wedged under the bow, choking for air. He pulled the dog free. Then he saw that his string of drinking nuts had vanished. His fish spear was gone. The knife that hung about his neck by a twist of bark had been torn away. Even his pareu of fiber, tapa, fell from his body as water soaked it through. He was naked, defenseless, without food or weapon, hurled forward on the breath of the hurricane. Okay, so we've got this word right here, this vocabulary word. Let's go ahead and write this one down. And before we do, let's look for context clues to figure out the meaning of this word. So he's losing all of these objects. Man, he's losing all his tools. And even his pareu of fiber, so it's made of some sort of like a cloth, fell from his body. Those are some good context clues right here. So they're saying that this pareu fell from his body, and now it's saying that he's naked, defenseless. Okay, so we know right there that it has got to be the clothing that he's wearing. So we're going to go ahead and write another bullet here for our inference that we just made. We're going to write down a pareu. Ooh, let me make sure I'm spelling that right. I think I may have missed it. Yeah, I should have gotten, oh, wait, did I get it? I got it. Yep, that is correct. Pareu is some sort of a cloth. And this is going to be a cloth that they would drape around them. So I'm going to say a cloth, or you know what? Let's just keep it simple. Let's make it clothing. We'll say a pareu is the type of clothing that they're wearing, and it is kind of like a sarong, a piece of cloth that they tie around themselves. So he's lost all his tools, and now even his clothes are gone. All right, let's keep going. Numb of all feeling, empty as a shell, still he clung to life, and the hours droned by. So gradual was the storm's easing, so the storm is starting to ease up, that at first the boy was unaware of it. The wind was blowing itself out, moving off into the empty spaces of the world. Uri crept toward Uri crept toward the prostrate boy, quailing beside him, whimpering softly. Night came and passed. There was no morning mist to dim the splendor of the sunburst across the swinging seas. Far away the wings of an albatross caught its gold as it wheeled and planed against the roof of heaven. The only hint of recent storm lay in the rough and tumbling waters. As the sun climbed through the hot hours of morning, it burned into the boy's body like the sacred fires of the great marea of Hikueru. Mafatu's skin blistered and cracked. His tongue swelled in his throat. He tried to call out a prayer to Maui, but his voice was thick. The sounds which came forth were no more than a hoarse cry. The canoe, stripped of sail and mast, without a paddle to guide it in the swift racing current, twisted and shifted in the rushing waters. Oh wow, so he survived this huge storm, and now he's dealing with other problems. He's lost all of his items. His boat is just torn apart. He doesn't even have a way of sailing. And then he's dealing with the sun now. That is, he has no sun protection whatsoever. As one hour merged into another, there came moments of fitful, choking slumber, a growing agony of thirst for the boy and his dog. Remember, where did his coconuts end up? Yeah, they are gone. So he doesn't even have coconut water to drink. And you might think, well, he's surrounded by water. But those of you who know science well, or you've been to the ocean, that is not water that you can drink. You cannot drink salt water, so that does not work. All right. The sun burned into them like an inescapable eye. The current which held Mafatu's canoe fast in its grip was bearing it swiftly on toward its mysterious destination. And thus the day passed, while night once more descended, bringing blessed release from the sun. Okay, so he's happy that the night has finally come. Now the air was luminous with promise of another day. Here comes another day. Out of the sultry mists, the sea emerged, blue and violent. With the coming of this new day, terror raised its head. Okay, we've got this beautiful print right here. You can see him with his boat there. And then we can see what's coming. We've got a good clue right there. Mafatu tried to fight it back, to deny its existence, but it gripped his heart with clammy fingers, tightened his throat. He flung himself flat on the floor of the canoe and buried his face in his arms. He must have cried out then. His voice was but a hoarse croak, yet it stirred Uri to life. The dog's ragged tail gave one feeble thump. With the ghost of a whimper, the animal laid his hot nose against the boy's hand. The brave thump of his dog's tail touched Mafatu profoundly. He caught the animal to him, while a new assurance, a new strength flooded his being. If Uri could have courage to die, surely he, Mafatu, could do no less. Okay, so that's pretty amazing. Pretty much Mafatu has resigned himself to knowing that he will die. He knows that he has no water. His boat is not really going anywhere. He knows that he's completely at a loss here. And he's lost all his tools, nothing to drink. In that instant, he heard a whir and fury in the sky above, a beat of wide wings. Looking upward, the boy's dulled eyes made out the widespread wings of an albatross circling above the canoe. "Kiwi!" Mafatu cried hoarsely. "Ai, Kiwi!" Even as he spoke, the bird wheeled slowly, then flew off straight ahead for the distant horizon. The boy noticed then that the sea current was carrying him almost due southwest. Kiwi's flight moved in exact parallel, so together. Once more it seemed as if his albatross were leading him onward, just as he had led the canoe out of the passage of Hikueru. Mafatu scanned the rim of the horizon. It looked as hard as the cut edge of a stone. But suddenly the boy's heart gave a great leap, and he started forward. It couldn't be. It was a cloud, but the sky was cloudless. Far off in the sea shimmer lay something that was neither sea nor sky. The swells lifting higher, now revealed, now concealed it. That shadow on the horizon. It was land. The boy flung himself forward, shaking uncontrollably. He seized Uri in his arms and lifted him up, laughing, crying, Uri, Uri, it's land, land. The dog sniffed at the air, and a little whimper broke from him. What island could this be? Was it Tahiti, the Golden Island, whose language was akin to that of Hikueru? Or was it perhaps one of the terrible dark islands of the Eaters of Men? Okay, wow, what would this possibly mean? Now, let's make an inference here. So it could be Tahiti, which we know at that time was a populated island, had lots of people on it. But he's also talking about this terrible dark island of the Eaters of Men. What do we call people who eat other people? Yeah, cannibals. Okay, that's scary. So he doesn't know that that island could be a friendly island or it could not be. Now the current had a westward drift, and it was to the west that the dark islands lay. All day, as the canoe drifted onward, the boy watched the distant shadow shape of land, not daring to take his eyes from it lest it vanish into the sea. Hunger and thirst were lulled into forgetfulness. There was only this one reality, land, escape from the sea. There was only this one, weak as he was, he still clung to the thwart, his lips whispering a silent prayer of gratitude. With waning afternoon, the island took more distinct form as the canoe drifted nearer. It was high and peaked, its valleys blue-shadowed against the paler tone of the sky. Hour by hour, with every lift of the swells, the island rose higher and higher, filling Mafatu's soul with wonder. Okay, so if the island's lifting higher and higher, make an inference here. They're not directly telling us, but is Mafatu getting closer or floating farther away? Yeah, he's getting closer to the island because it's appearing to lift higher and higher. The hills or mountains, whatever it's describing up here, are rising higher. Hikueru, the only land he had ever seen, was as flat as his hand, but a great single peak crowned this strange island. Trees rose green and fair, tier upon tier of them, from the shoreline into the foothills of the Purple Mountain. Uri had caught the scent of the land now and was quivering with delight. Then, from far off, came the first muffled thunder of the reef, the boom of the surf high bursting on the barrier coral. That sound, was it the voice of Moana? Someday, Mafatu, someday. Involuntarily, the boy shuddered. Would his ears never be free of the sea god's threat? Mafatu was powerless to guide his craft. He sensed that the current had quickened. He could only watch helplessly as the little canoe, swift as the following gulls, rushed to meet the tides of the island, where they met and churned in a cross sea of conflict. Now across the swells came a sound like a chorus of ghostly fishermen, weary with their... Ooh, there's a beautiful print right there. You can see the high peak in the island that he's talking about there. And look how tiny his little boat is. You can see these palm trees here. All right, let me back that up a little bit. Now across the swells came a sound like a chorus of ghostly fishermen, weary with their day's toil. Seabirds, always complaining, never at rest, while softer, yet rising above it, was another sound, the voice of the reef itself, quieting with sundown, like the reassuring hush of a mother to her child. Night stole up from the face of the sea, enveloping the world. There was no moon, but the black sky was spangled with unguessed millions of stars. Other worlds, other suns. To the watching boy, with land in the offing, they seemed closer and more friendly. The bottom star of the Southern Cross pointed to the end of the world. A soft land breeze, heavy with the scent of flowers, wafted out across the dark waters, tantalizing, bittersweet. Weak with thirst, the boy drifted now into a merciful sleep. He struggled against it, like a weary swimmer fighting a riptide, but his head drooped and his eyes closed. Imagine how long he's been awake, just fighting against the elements. He was aroused at midnight by a thunderous tumult in his ears. Of a sudden, he felt the canoe under him lifted and flung high into the air. Then down it crashed into splinters upon the reef. Boy and dog were hurled headlong into the boiling surf. Okay, so his boat has finally crashed into the reef, and that's really common for an island to be surrounded by coral reef. So he's crashed into that reef, and he probably has a bit more to go before he can get to the island. The shock of cold water brought Mufatu half back to consciousness. Blindly, he struck out, fighting for survival. Uri! Where was he? No sign of the dog. The boy was aware that the canoe must have been flung over the barrier reef, for here the water was scarcely troubled by wind or tide. Now he was swimming, swimming. Somewhere ahead, a strip of beach, salt white in the darkness, lured him onward. His muscles did it of themselves, only a will to live. A strip of sand, white in the night. He caught the gleam of a shark's belly, close at hand, but on he swam. His unhampered limbs moved freely through the water. Of a sudden, there was something solid beneath his feet. Sand. Mufatu stumbled, staggered, fell to his knees in the shallows. His lips moved in dry, soundless speech. Lying there with the water rippling and breaking over him, he pulled himself half upright, swayed onward. The palms, trooping to the edge of the beach, were motionless in the night air. All the world seemed to hold its breath as this boy climbed up out of the sea. Wow, so he's even swimming past sharks, and he makes it to this beach of this island. He's climbing out onto the shore of the beach. He fell to the sand once more. Then, guided by he knew not what impulse, he dragged himself to the edge of the jungle. A murmur of water reached his ears, soft as a chuckle of pleasant laughter. Water, sweet water. Down the face of an age-worn rock, a small cascade lost itself amid ferns and cool mosses. A ragged, strangling cry broke from Mafatu's throat. He stood upright to full height. Then he crashed to the mossy bank. One cheek lay in the cool water. Wow. So he just practically passes out, and he happens to fall with the sight of his face in the water that he so desperately needs. The moon lifted above the rim of the palms. It outlined in silver the form of a boy thin with hunger, naked as the day star. It revealed a small, wet dog, dragging himself across the beach to his master's side. Mufatu lay without moving. Before Uri drank, he touched the boy's cheek with his hot muzzle. Wow, dogs truly are man's best friend, huh? So he gives a loving nuzzle to Mufatu before he even takes a drink himself. All right, you guys, that brings us to the end of chapter 2. So we have a summary to write. Okay, so let's pull out those blue papers. And we've got this space to write in right here. Since I haven't gone beyond this row, this third row, when I was writing my notes, I'm going to try to keep my summary right in here so that we can preserve 2 other rows for later on when we're reading. So right here in this third row, let's go ahead and start. And remember when we are writing our summaries, we want them to be as short as possible, but we also have to fit quite a lot in there. We want to give as many key details as we possibly can, trying to list who, what, where, when, why, and how. And then we also want to focus on the central idea. And I think we can agree that the central idea, the most important point that this chapter is making is that it's describing his voyage in his ship. The entire chapter practically was spent with him tossing on the waves at sea. So let's go ahead and capture that. We're going to start by writing at first. If you recall at the first of this chapter, the ocean is barely, he's just riding along on a current, and there isn't even wind to push the boat. He's just riding along in the current. So we're going to say at first, the voyage is pretty uneventful. It's pretty uneventful. Without wind for the sails. Okay, so I've got at first the voyage is uneventful without wind for the sails. I probably better put a comma right there before the word without. Without wind for the sails, comma again, but, okay, that changes pretty quickly, right? But then a storm hits, comma, and, so I've got at first the voyage is uneventful, comma, without wind for the sails, comma, but then a storm hits, comma, and one by one, all of Mafatu's tools are washed away. Okay, so that's an important key event, you guys. We know now that he's made it safely to an island, but he has nothing. He doesn't have a spear for fishing. He doesn't have a knife. So all of his tools got washed away in that storm. Okay, after the storm, Mafatu and Uri are scorched. Are scorched by the sun and intensely thirsty. I'm going to write the word intensely thirsty because they almost die because they have nothing to drink. Okay, so what I've got right here, after the storm, comma, Mafatu and Uri are scorched by the sun and intensely thirsty. Then I'm going to put a hyphen right here. They almost die. I think that's really important to note. Remember, at one point, Mafatu thought he would die, and it was just the thump of Uri's tail that gives him the courage to keep going. They almost die, comma, then Kiwi appears, comma, leading them to land, comma, and they crash. I'm still trying to squeeze it into this space, so I'm trying to write really small. They crash on the reef. Ooh, I can probably squeeze it in just right here. Reef of an island. All right, so I'm going to leave that right there so that you can make sure to catch up. I'm going to go ahead and read this out loud to you again. I have, at first, the voyage is uneventful, without wind for the sails. But then a storm hits, and one by one, all of Mafatu's tools are washed away. After the storm, Mafatu and Uri are scorched by the sun and intensely thirsty. They almost die. Then Kiwi appears, leading them to land, and they crash on the reef of an island. Now notice, I tried to keep it as short as possible, but I still had to include a lot of key events. So this ended up being 2 sentences. You want a summary to be about 1 to 2 sentences. They are longer sentences, though. Like we're going to learn later on about compound sentences and complex sentences, but we want to pack in that information. Okay, and then the last thing I need to put is for this row, these are all notes for chapter 2. So right over here in this column, I'm going to go ahead and write that these are chapter 2 notes. And we were able to this time fit it all in one row. I don't know if that's always going to happen, but here we go. Okay, I'm going to read this off one last time and then we are good to go, guys. At first, the voyage is uneventful, comma, without wind for the sails, comma. But then a storm hits, comma, and one by one, comma, all of Mafatu's tools are washed away. After the storm, comma, Mafatu and Uri are scorched by the sun and intensely thirsty. They almost die, comma. Then Kiwi appears, comma, leading them to land, comma, and they crash on the reef of an island. All right, thank you for following right along with me. We will start on chapter 3 next time.